Good evening, and thank you for joining us for BHK Consulting presents Race and Education Part 1. I'm Dr. Robert E. Braylock, and I serve as founder, owner, and CEO of BHK Consulting. We're excited to have you all with us this evening as we discuss education as it pertains to race. Education and race have had an interesting relationship really throughout the entire duration of the United States being founded, and even until present day, from Native Americans being forced to attend boarding schools where they were forced to assimilate into specifically European American culture, to racial inequities that we see with suspensions with Black students, even graduation rates in high school for Black and Brown students, as well as college admission rates, retention rates, and graduation rates. So race and education have consistently had an unfortunate relationship within education from preschool through higher education. And so this evening we have education scholars and practitioners with us that will be discussing their experiences within their different sectors and providing insight to us as we really grapple with this unique moment in American history as our country has really acknowledged racial injustice collectively, really for the first time ever. And so although these issues are not new by any means, they've been happening for centuries, literally centuries, there has not yet been a collective acknowledgement of racial injustice within the United States until now. So with the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, there's been an understanding of what's been happening for centuries. And COVID-19 has kind of played a factor into that, with people being quarantined within their homes. And so it's been hard for people to not recognize and to see repeatedly the gravity and the level of disgust with the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and many other people that have died since then, as well as some of the injustices that we've seen and inequities that we've seen within how the virus has impacted Black and Brown communities. And so this topic is really pertinent as we understand that education has a major influence on almost every area of society. And so we're excited tonight to really dive into how race affects education. And so I'm going to have each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves so you all have an understanding of their background and the context in which they speak from.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here. I am Dr. Evandra Catherine. I am a mother of a child with Asperger's. And so my trajectory into education started with him. I was homeless myself. To escape homelessness, I went to the military. After the military, I went to get my undergrad degree in African American Studies to just sort of get knowledge of self. And throughout that process, I got involved in a lot of advocacy and activism and organizing, and so decided to go a policy route. And so both of my graduate degrees are in policy and public administration. My PhD specializes in special education. My 9 to 5 now, I'm a postdoc on the Children's Equity Project, where we look at issues that impact Black and Brown children birth to 8 years old, so early childhood development. And I'm just excited to be here to talk about race and education. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us this evening.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Winston Carpenter. I am an educator in the East Cleveland City School District. This will be my 20th year, the only job I've ever had since I graduated undergrad at John Carroll University. I am a Cleveland native. I grew up in Cleveland on the east side. I attended Cleveland Public Schools. I am a gifted intervention specialist by trade, and now that was my previous job, I'm starting a new season, and I will be an instructional coach for educators. So I teach in a very compromised community who my students have a lot of needs, and I'm there to provide for them, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us as well.
My name is Michael Alonzo. I'm an educator as well. I teach at Buckeye Central Middle School, English 8th grade and reading. I am the oldest of 6 kids. I'm from the East Los Angeles suburb of San Gabriel. I was born and raised in California. I graduated in the year 2000, went on to college, but didn't know what I was doing. Couldn't afford it either. And because I'm the first person to try to attempt doing college from my family, it didn't work out. Ended up dropping out and working jobs until I started working as a loss prevention agent, then later an investigator. After that, still trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. You hit that glass ceiling, and decided I was going to try some new things, try music ministry. Didn't work out, but ended up meeting my wife online and moving out to Ohio at the same time, trying to get back into school. Ended up going to Owens Community College here in Findlay, Ohio, and then transferred from there to Bowling Green State University, where I graduated with my degree in adolescent young adult English education. This will be my third year teaching. I purposely chose to teach at a rural school because I feel like it's an opportunity for me to get to share multicultural and diverse cultural education to students who don't normally get an opportunity to be exposed to that. To try to help change the narrative in their lives so that they can understand that the wider world outside of them is a very multicultural world, and it is an awesome place for them to try to learn from. I have a 1-year-old and another baby on the way, and I'm just excited to be here. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We are excited to have you on the call.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Brandon Gaddy. I am originally from Mansfield, Ohio, but I currently reside in Toledo. I'm a graduate of Mansfield Senior High School, the only school to spell tigers with a Y in the state of Ohio. Proud TY Tiger. I went on to go to the University of Toledo, have a bachelor's in business administration and a master's in higher education. Excuse me. I started working at the University of Toledo with retention programs for African American student enrichment programs. It was a office that was started to attack the graduation and retention rates of students of color, specifically African Americans. Been in student affairs, higher education now for about 15, almost 16 years. North Central State College in Mansfield, Ohio. And now I'm here as the director of TRIO Student Support Services at Owens Community College. For those that don't know, TRIO is a federally funded program that works with students who are first generation, low income, or students who have a physical, mental, or learning disability. Been with TRIO now going into 6th year, and we are working with students in the Toledo area, specifically the Toledo Owens campus.
Thank you so much for being on this call tonight. We definitely appreciate it. So thank you all, everyone, for providing some background about your experience and where you are now, and helping our listeners to have like I said, a better understanding of you all's education context and some of your upbringing as well. So with this first question, I find out a little bit more about you all's history. What is one of your earliest memories of education?
Guess I'll jump in first. I guess my first memory of education, I was in kindergarten at a school called Carpenter. And there was a guy who kind of looked like me. I guess we were both and we swapped jackets. He was in a different class from there. We swapped jackets somehow, and we were in different classes, and all of a sudden he became like my best friend. We started learning together there, man. I remember just being in kindergarten and looking around and just kind of being like, wow, I want to go home as soon as possible. I can remember saying that to myself, like, I want my mom. But I mean, that's my very earliest memory of education.
I think for me, mine is just been still. So because I mentioned earlier that I was homeless, I was registered in, it was kindergarten to the 1st grade by someone that wasn't my caregiver. And you know how our family give us family names? So everyone knew my family name, not my legal first name. So my caregiver registered me for school. My name is Evandra, but the D looked like an O on my social security card. So they called me Evanora. And so my very first experience with education was being called Evanora for like a whole day until I got home to first find out where did it come from, because I had only been called one name all my life. So that was my first experience with education. And that's when I you know, that takes that with you, because some people just don't want to know how to call your name, or they want to pronounce it right in the first place. So I don't think if it was an O or a D, it would have got pronounced right. But yeah, I was Evernora for a day. I think it was kindergarten.
Names on the first day of school or even the first week of school can be a trying time.
Yeah, so my name was Shauna. That was the go-to name. So can't go wrong with Shauna.
Do you ever go by that anymore? Like, does anyone?
Everyone calls me Shauna from back home, so it's terrible.
Okay.
I think
Good.
my earliest memory was showing up at kindergarten and like meeting this kid who he was an Asian kid, and he was like, "Hey, I just want you to know." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "There's the little girl, and she's trying to kiss everybody, so just run." And I went, "Okay." So Sansa's a solid girl. Her name was Violet. I don't know why I remember. I don't remember what she looked like, but I remember running, booking it. Apparently, I booked it from the kindergarten area to like where the first graders and second graders are, and it was a completely different part, and I got lost. So like, Edward was his name, and he came and found me and brought me back. This was Los Molinos elementary school, man, in Hacienda Heights. So it was like,
Wow.
I remember like being the only boy who did not get kissed. I was like, yes, I made it. All right. I don't got the cooties. I'm okay. I'm all right.
Man, that's funny. That is funny.
And for myself, it's just, I remember starting kindergarten, and our teacher wanted us to do letter people. And I was so appalled by that because I could read already. So I was very offended by the fact that she wanted me to use some shaving cream and make these letters on the table. So I politely just went to my book bag and pulled out a chapter book. Like, I can already read. Why am I doing letter people? I need something else to do with my time. So needless to say, she did not like that. And here comes the rhythm stick. You know what happened with that. And then I said I was never going back to school ever again. So that's my, literally, outside of my home, that's my first experience with education. So it was quite different than what I expected. But my family intervened, and there were some changes made. So that's what I remember. My needs not being met, just being honest.
Wow. Those are some funny stories and memorable as well. I understand how those are one of you all's earliest memories, from being called the wrong name to having a girl chase you and trying to kiss you on the first day of school. I understand. That's good. When did you all first realize that you wanted to be an educator or go into the field of education? Out of all of the many different sectors to work in and professions, like, when was it that you all decided to choose education?
I think mine was my senior year in high school. Like, I mean, I always wanted to be a teacher, but for me, it was there's no way I'm gonna be. I can't afford it, all the college. But it was just the dream, right? And the dream, I think, came about when my senior year, my AP English teacher, he was short and he was weird looking, right? But he was a genius. Like, the guy knew how to pull answers out of kids, you know, when they thought they were going to try to get an easy buy. And so it was the first time I was in an AP class of that level. And I felt like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, because like I was like all the really smart kids are around me, and I'm like, what am I doing in this class? Was because I understood English really well, like just grammar and literature and everything. I just found it fascinating. And he has this senior project where you have to do a book report and you have to present it and you have to do all these things, and nobody wanted to be my partner. So I'm like, all right, that's it. So I walked up to him like, Mr. Baker, what is the hardest book on this list? And he said, well, it's Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I went, all right, I'm gonna read that. He's like, are you sure? Like, I've never had a student do a report on that. I'm like, well, here we go, I'm gonna do it. And so I did it. It was late because I was just me with no partner, but despite it being late, I still got an A on it. And he kept it. I did not know until a few years ago that he kept that and showed students years afterwards that this is what you can do with your project. And I was like, oh, dang, I didn't know that. So just his impact on me and challenging me to try to do better made me feel like I need to do that. That, and cooped up with my choir director that senior year, like my house burned down my senior year. And I ended up moving away from my family to finish my senior year at the high school that I started out at, because like my mom went to jail, and just all these crazy things that were happening all at once. And finally, my choir director took me under his wing and really cared for me. So I wanted to be that person, like the person that challenges somebody educationally, but also challenges them on life, like, because that's what my choir director and my English teacher did for me. So it was like I wanted to do that, and that was always the chase. It's like I want to be able to afford school so I can go and finish it, and here I am doing it and trying to help students out the same way, So that was, I think, senior year for me in high school was the moment when I knew I needed to be an educator.
I always knew I wanted to be an educator. It started when I was very young. I talked my mother into buying this chalkboard from a garage sale, and then chalk. And so I would harass the children on my street to be my students. And they had to sit on my steps at my house, and I would have my little chalkboard. I would assign homework. So they would run when they would see me coming, needless to say, because I wanted to play, not Barbies, but I wanted to play school. And then from there, at Cottonwood, at my high school, we had an opportunity to do a teacher prep program for 2 or 3 years. So I had an opportunity to write lessons, work in classrooms. I actually went back to the elementary school that I attended and would volunteer. And from there, it just flourished. I'm actually a 3rd generation educator. So it started with my aunt, who really just led the torch. The torch started it for our family in Alabama, because at that time, I'm the youngest of 6, but from an untraditional family. My parents were 80 when they passed away. So just recently, about a little over a year and a half ago. So education was very important because they were from Alabama and they grew up in Jim Crow South. So they wanted something different for us. And my parents migrated up here so that they could have something different for my siblings at the time. And I was a surprise child. Here you are by yourself. So I grew up alone, but not alone at the same time. But I just knew that I wanted to be an educator. I always knew I wanted to be an educator. I was fascinated by learning. I always was reading and looking in encyclopedias and sharing that knowledge with others. So I just always knew I wanted to be an educator.
I'll go. I think I just kind of fell into it, honestly. In middle school, I had an administrator, a principal. His name was Doug Castle. And it was just amazing how he just knew everybody. And he was one of those people who you respected because he just demanded respect. He was one of those people that was well known within the city. He was an older Caucasian man, but he was well known around everywhere. But I didn't go to school to major in education. I didn't want to do anything in teaching. I wanted to be in business. And when I got to, when I got to the University of Toledo, I was getting ready to graduate and talking with my hall director at the time. And he was like, you could do this for a living. And I was like, nah, I never heard of anything like that. I don't know anything about higher ed. I don't know anything about student affairs, any of that. He was like, you could do this for a living. And literally, I was in the information and systems class and was working on a project. And it was literally coding, and I was typing, and I worked on it for like 9-10 hours straight, and it didn't work. And I went to the instructor, and he took like 2 keystrokes, like boom, 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 and it was done. And at that point, I was like, I'm not doing this the rest of my life. I went straight over and talked to the people in the higher education division, started working there in higher ed, and just wanted to make a difference like Mr. Castle. I got tired of seeing students who look like me at the collegiate level go home. I got tired of seeing students who look like me not finish or not think about, what college really looked like or how to think what was going to happen next. And so I just fell in love with it, especially when we started looking at retention rates and especially graduation rates at the time at the University of Toledo. It was less than 22% 6-year graduation rate for students. And that at that point just kind of was a no-go for me. And I just fell into it and started working from there on.
Mine just a little bit different. You never know what schools offer you as a child that you take later in life. And I think we're all roughly the same generation. So I grew up in the generation where we had assemblies at school, if y'all remember going to assemblies. But some of the most powerful life messages came in the assemblies. It was always somebody to come to talk about some mistake they made as a child, and I'm going to come talk to you students so you don't make it as an adult. That's basically what sort of assemblies were in a nutshell. And I used to always want to get on the stage and do that. Like I said, I was homeless, and so I went through a lot of trauma, and I used to think, man, I want to get on the stage and sort of tell people like other things like to do in life, like how to survive as an unemancipated youth, right? So I used to think about that, and then that ultimately led into the space of public intellectual, just understanding how content is delivered and translated from people. And especially down to Black people, a lot of the times we don't get messages because who the messenger is. And so I've always just wanted to be in a space where I could communicate what's going on, because I've had to live in all aspects of life. And so translating back down is like really, really important to me. Even being in the academy now, I don't like scientific journals, peer-reviewed journals. None of my people reading that, nor have access to it. And so part of being an educator for me is just sort of that intellectual that can give people access to knowledge they can't get on their own, or knowledge that's kept away, or knowledge that might be biased. And so in a sense, an educator is all of us. In a sense, we all have it in us. But mine sort of really did come from assemblies that our kids don't even have time to get these days. You know, even if it was Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, I mean, those stories matter, like, right? You wasn't going to go drink and drive after Mothers Against Drunk Drivers showed up for the assembly. So yeah, anyways, that's it.
That's good. It's so interesting how everybody has a different path into their profession. And so I appreciate you all providing some background about you all. So when I went to Cleveland Heights High School, which is a public school in the greater Cleveland region. And so when I got there, there was this group called the Minority Student Achievement Network. And so prior to attending Cleveland Heights High, I was not really ever aware, probably because I attended I went to the same elementary and middle school. So from K to 8, I was at the same school. But it was predominantly Black school. We had students from other races and ethnicities, but for the most part, it was predominantly Black. And so when I learned about the Minority Student Achievement Network at Cleveland Heights, I'm like, okay, like, what is this about? And so really the purpose of the organization is to close the achievement gap between minority students and majority students. It's pretty simple, specifically looking at students of color, really, in comparison to white students. And so prior to that time, I was not aware of any type of achievement gap or anything like that. And so this next question is really, when did you first realize that there were racial inequities within education, and what did that do to you?
I never went to the same school more than 1 year, ever in life. In my second grade year, I went to 7 schools in second grade. So I never really knew what was going on in school. I have no memories of school actually at all when I think about it as an adult. But I do know I went to all white schools. And so that probably played a role when I became an adult and I was around other high school kids, or I was volunteering to go back into the high schools, like when I was a college student and stuff, I would look around and be like, dang, like we had Chick-fil-A for lunch, Taco Bell all inside the school. We had a swimming pool in the school. We had planetarium in my school, an observatory in the school. And I'm like looking at these kids, and they got lunches where the guys got to eat lunch at a time, the girls eat lunch at a time. They didn't have books. And it was just then, as an adult, going back to volunteer, to just see that what I was given and didn't even know it was something I was being given, that I just took for granted. Like, I mean, seriously, like I didn't even know that it was like that in every school. I thought every kid was eating Chick-fil-A and Taco Bell for lunch at school in the lunchroom, right? Like, I thought that's what it was. I thought every student had swimming pool at school. Like, we went swimming in the planetarium and all that. I thought that came standard with schools until like I started going back and volunteering and really realizing, like, wait a minute, I had something that I couldn't take advantage of for the position that I was in, but not knowing that I had access to that, and probably any of those surroundings and environments that I were in probably is responsible for where I am today. And a lot of people sort of talk about resilience, but when you're in environments that are probably really nurturing environments, although you have no idea that's the case, it could probably help you in sense. And that's kind of, I feel like, what happens to me when people oftentimes ask me, you know, like, if you had this lifestyle growing up as a childhood, how did you get here? Well, education was my refuge. Like, when I went to school, I had everything to survive as a kid. If you're homeless, you don't have. Like I said, I had all the food, all the drinks, all the everything I needed in school. And I think for me, I just wanted to stay as close as to the academy or a school as possible. And so, yeah, I just did not know what I had given to me. And now my kid, my own son, he's in Title I schools, and he's been in Title I schools since he started preschool. And I plan on him to be in Title I schools until I can't anymore. But it's starting to get that point as he's getting older. He's gifted, and so it's harder keeping him in those type of schools. But yeah. So.
Can you break down? Thank you for sharing that. That was wow. That's I think perspective means a lot. And so if that is what you've experienced and you haven't realized what other people's experiences are, that makes a lot of sense. Could you break down what Title I is for people who do not know what that is?
In most layman's terms, it's a federal designation where if you have a Title I school, you're supposed to get more resources because the populations that you're serving in your school are disadvantaged. And so you're supposed to get more resources. And they're supposed to go towards, like, remediation, I feel like is a bad word, but they're supposed to go towards things like math and reading to sort of give kids an extra boost when they're in Title I schools. But yeah, everything isn't what it is. But it does designate, and it also designates a certain percentage and concentration of kids of color too, for it to be Title I think. Or I can't say kids of color. I think it's a designation on poverty because there is Title I all white schools. But
thank you for that background.
You're welcome. Sorry.
And I think for me, it was when I began to student teach and had opportunities to be in different types of school districts in the inner ring suburbs, that's what they're called in Cuyahoga County. So I would go to a very affluent district because as a student, I really didn't see it as much because we partnered with a local company. So whatever the district couldn't provide, they provided for us. So we had like an education partner. So I didn't really miss out on that end. But it was very apparent when I would student teach or do a practicum or some type of work in a very affluent community and then just go literally 5 miles down, maybe north to down the street in a more urban community and just see the disparities. It was like night and day. And it went back to what you just said. You know, they had Chick-fil-A, it was a PTO, there were computers in the classroom. Then I go to a community that didn't have that, just literally down the street, no more than 5 miles away. Maybe there is a PTO, maybe there's not a PTO, maybe there are enough resources for everyone. There's one computer to roll around throughout for that grade level, not necessarily designated computers. So coupled with reading Jonathan Kozo's Savage Inequalities, that was part of my freshman seminar, that just really, I could not believe what I was seeing, that we lived in America, because it looked like a third world country, especially when we watched the video that was associated with the actual book. I was appalled that it hasn't gone away. So it's the same script, just different actors. And it's just appalled to know that this still is going on in America today, that we have these huge disparities with our children. And right now, what really helped us to see that was the digital divide when we had to close the schools. So it's sad, and something has to be done about it because it's the same story.
For me, I think it was probably around middle school. I was in a leadership program where when you were in athletics, you had those conferences like OHC and whatever else. So we had a leadership conference for athletes. And so we would travel to go to each school. You would get picked to go to different schools. And so the way Mansfield is set up is, I guess you could call Mansfield the urban center I wouldn't, but most people would. Uh, but around you had those, you know, those suburban areas. So you had places that, like Lexington and Ontario, even a Madison, and you would go to these different areas and just kind of see the differences in the schools, man. That was the first real eye opener for me, because when I went into a school like Ashland, which is like 5 minutes away, literally, I would walk into the school and they got fresh baked cookies in the cafeteria, and their books are brand new, and their athletic teams were, you know, they were subpar. We were the school that I guess everybody didn't want to play because we were Mansfield. We were the urban school, but we were kicking everybody's behind and everything. So, you know, they got mad at that. Uh, but we were the school that nobody wanted to go to unless you were an athlete, unless you really wanted to play and be recognized as an athlete. And so I think that was the eye opener, especially with the leadership group. We would travel those different schools, and you could see how many disparities there were in things. From Mansfield, I can remember being in high school, and literally in our high school, you could go to certain classrooms and you could stick your hand outside. Like there's literally, you could stick your hand outside. Um, and so you saw so many things diminish the building, but you never saw the spirit was still there. But we were still achieving, but we were a little further behind in a lot of different places. And so that was what made me kind of want to do more, want to achieve more, and want to see better for my community.
For me, I think it's kind of two-pronged, because it was when I was young, and then again when I was older. So when I was young, we moved around a lot too. Just with my mother was a career criminal, and I don't think she's had a job since like 1989. So um, it was us always bouncing around, losing houses and stuff like that, until we ended up in the high desert in Southern California. And that was the first time I remember being at a school that was predominantly white. Like all the schools I went to were predominantly Black and Hispanic. And then this was in the high desert, was a lot more white kids. And I remember going, wow, this is weird. Like everyone's dressed nice and got nice shoes and everything. So it was very different, but everyone was pretty cheap. They were treated pretty well until we got to middle school. So when we got to middle school, it was a broke down middle school. And everyone started segregating themselves by race. Like if I wanted to hang out with my best friend who was Black, but I could only do it on the basketball court. The only place that was the great equalizer for anybody was on the basketball court. Like that was it. But when you're in class, you talk to your homies, you know, and if they're a different color, man, you don't talk to them. Like you gotta wait. Like we had a race riot in 7th grade, you know, and like it was all the Black and Hispanic students versus all these kids who were calling people the N-word and calling them this and that. And it's like I got right in the thick of it, you know, and it's how the teachers treated us, with the exception of a few, man. Most of them treated us like we were criminals already. And I remember like half of my crew, man, got expelled because they were tagging up inside the locker room. Like that's what it was. And then we lost our home, and I got transferred to the other side of the town, like you guys said, man, 5 minutes away and 5 miles away, and it's the brand new school, and it's beautiful, and everyone's treated nice, and all the books are new, computers in the classroom. And it was like a whole fresh start, where I'm trying not to be gangster like all of my friends were, and it was just crazy just to see like the disparity between one side of town and the other side of town. And it didn't hit me until I was in high school, just how different my opportunities were just moving across town, because of the way people treated each other, and how their lack of school pride or lack of ambitions to try to do anything outside of school. Like it, from one side of town to the other, it was crazy. And it didn't hit me fully until I was student teaching, and realizing that I have a unique opportunity to be able to speak in the people who want to achieve something with themselves, you know, who come from like just an ambitious family or anything, with the same time with the students who are disadvantaged. So like I had a few students who were minority students in my student teaching year, who I felt like I was the very first male teacher of color that they got to experience, who encouraged them to keep going, to do things, to read more, to study more, you know, especially for me. Like I'm big on hip hop culture, so like it's like I was telling him, like, man, some of the guys you're listening to, man, that stuff's gross, man. You need to do some old school stuff, man, and start learning stuff from these dudes who learned from that. Find out the roots of where rap came from. It came from blues. It came from the bayou, homie. Like you can learn about that and learn how that can enrich your learning as you get older. And I still talk to these students every now and then, just to check up on them and see how they're doing, and they're doing good and excelling and stuff. But it didn't hit all that didn't come to fruition until recently, you know. So it's interesting to see those gaps and everything now as I look back and go, man, wow, things were very, very, very divided when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Hey, Robert, can I jump in? I'll piggyback off of something.
For sure.
I think
for sure.
something that Michael said was, you know, as I got older, I think it was when I was in college, I started seeing people who look like me going home quicker. I started with a leadership class. That's part of the reason I chose the institution that I chose. And there were 5 of us that were of color. By the time we graduated, there were 2 of us. And I just started seeing, and you seen where we were coming from. Most came from, unfortunately, I'll say this, Cleveland. And they came from Cleveland public schools. And they weren't ready for the rigor of what was there at the collegiate level. And then just in classes, you would go into certain classes, especially as you progress in your major, especially, that's where you really start to see that divide. When you're the only person of color, sometimes the only person of color and the only male in certain classrooms as well. And you start having conversations with those people in those classes, and you see where they came from or where their pedigree was from. You know, they went to public schools, but are private schools, especially in the Toledo area. You have, you know, your major private schools, and those students are coming from very strong educational backgrounds. So I think that was another place for me where I really saw that break, when I started to see more of the students that looked like me going home, and they weren't ready.
Yeah. Man, that's it's so discouraging to talk about it. But I think it, just from hearing the responses that you all gave, it's also, I think, largely unrecognized. And so I look at all of us as people of color, and we didn't realize this until, most of us didn't realize it until like after high school, really. And so I know if it's something that we have not fully recognized until later on, that I would say that I would imagine that a lot of white folks have not recognized how critical it is, and what the statistics are and things like that in terms of racial inequities and injustices within education. What are some of the other trends that you all are seeing in school and education as a whole as it pertains to students of color?
Well, one thing that I'm seeing is on the teacher end is trauma-informed training, and restorative practices, or restorative justice, RJ, as we like to call it, and PBIS, which is positive behavior intervention systems, trying to move away from that more traditional way of disciplining students. Also a trend in just helping students with executive functioning skills so that you can be able, you know, Brandon, like you said, be able to function outside of the school realm if you choose a career path or if you choose to go to a university. Those are the really huge things that we are really pushing in the area that I am in, that I teach in, and just the SLE, the social emotional learning, dealing with mindfulness, helping our students to really learn coping strategies, because they do face so many ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. So how do we help them to overcome that? And how do we help to make sure that we're providing those wraparound services, not necessarily just for them, but also for their families as well, because we know it takes a village. And if it takes a village, then we have to make sure we provide those resources to make sure that our village is nourished and that it can foster and move forward. So those are some trends that I'm seeing where I am.
I'll piggyback that. The same thing with, like, especially with the social emotional. Like for me, it's trying to educate the young men that it's okay for them to to be vulnerable, to speak about their feelings, and to get them, especially with I had a student last year, I'm gonna call him Tilo, right? And just Tilo walking my student, and he walked in, he's already been held back once. He gets in a lot of fights. He's already got a reputation from different schools he's been to. But the first thing I said when I saw him walk in my classroom, like, Tilo, I've been waiting to teach you, homie. I was waiting all last year to get you in my class. And I got him reading books. I got him believing in himself, like, because like no one had ever done that. Kids sleeping inside of a sleeper trailer, right? You know, next to his parents' single wide. Like, he's just no hope kind of thing. But I'm like, you got things that, like, people look up to you, bro. You're gonna be able to do things with that. Like, you have a presence that you cannot deny has leadership qualities. Let's cultivate that. Let's focus that. And he started just pulling books off of my library, you know, like, hey, you ever read this book? I'm like, oh, that book's called On the Come Up. The same person that wrote like Angie Thomas, right? Just book. Anyway, so like he just started reading some of the
I
books.
hate
like
you
that.
give.
Thank you. I'm getting mixed up with Dear Martin, which is another book that I teach out of. So like he's started reading all the books that I have in there, because I have a whole section that says multicultural authors. And so he started reading from my books there, and he was just doing that. And his teacher from the previous year was like, he's never done that before. You know, so trying to get them to understand that in order to teach these young men who come from troubled backgrounds, man, like, you can't just throw them into a box and say this is what's going to be for the rest of their lives. Like, nah, man, they have hope. They have things that they can do with that. That you have to be able to reach them at their level, and speak some kind of interest into them. You know, that's one big reason why I chose to work at the school that I chose to, because I've seen it. I've seen a PE teacher berate another student simply because he didn't want to run the mile that day, but not knowing that this student is coming from a foster program. He's a mixed racial kid who, like, is still trying to wrestle with his identity. He's very short, like, the kid's been picked on, so he started picking on other people just the same. And first thing I did was like, hey man, can you back off for a second? I'm gonna talk to you, man, real quick. And just pulled him in my classroom. We just started talking and just got him to talk about some things. And then, like, we just transfer him out of that class as soon as we can. Talk to the principal, talk to other people. And like, we need to change the way with which some of these old school teachers respond to the males, especially inside the classes, man, especially the ones who are minorities, because they just put them in a box and think that that's the way you're supposed to treat them, you know. And once we started adopting more like a social emotional stuff, and we're doing the PBIS as well, it's really starting to help out and show some fruition, and seeing some of these students achieve better goals as they are getting older.
You just said an acronym. Can you break that down for our viewers?
Which one?
I think you said, was it PBIS?
Yeah, positive behavior in
Intervention.
Thank you.
Support.
Positive behavior and
intervention supports.
Intervention support. Okay, thank you.
It's a system. Just an acronym. Something different than traditional behavior, ways that you would impose behavior or consequences, or when someone has an infraction.
Right, like I do logical consequences in my class. So like, I had two knucklehead students who were celebrating because they won on their Kahoot quiz, and they knocked over one of my bookshelves and it broke. And so all the eyes turned on me. They're like, "Oh, Mr. Alonzo about to get gangster on them," right? So I just looked at them and was like, "All right, boys, come on, bring it in." And I'm like, "All right, what happened? What should we do about it?" "Well, we can fix it." "Good idea. Do you have a hammer and nails at home?" "Yeah." "All right, I'm gonna let the principal know you're bringing a hammer and nails. Bring it to my classroom." And during their lunch period, they came upstairs, worked on it real quick. I said, "All right, you're done. Cool. Let's not do that again. All right. When you celebrate, don't wreck my stuff. You're right." Right, where I could have yelled, I could have written them up, could have given them detention, right, and all that stuff. But it's like, no, man, logical consequences to me speak better. So it's been helping out with especially with my male students.
Yeah, that's good.
I get encouraged when I hear these stories because I hear the changes and the support that's there. I think this is a negative trend. Higher education is rigid. It has not changed. They are very rigid in how the thought processes. Now we're being forced to make some thinking changes, but it's very slow. Especially when you look at your major institutions, your land grant institutions, many of them, while they're progressive in their thought, they're not always progressive in their action. And so you see that trend of students coming who have had that kind of wraparound, and now they get into an area where they don't have it as much. On the academic side, and when you break down higher education, you really have your student service side versus your academic sometimes. I hate to say the versus, because I think we work together, but your student services sides are now moving more towards that holistic approach of advising, the intrusive advising, the case management style advising, but you have individuals who aren't used to the cultural changes that are there. And so there's always this clash, and not understanding the cultural pieces, but sometimes it's just the lifestyle pieces of how a lot of students are and live. Working with students who are first gen, low income, and have disabilities, you find there's so many different challenges because they come to an institution with a goal in one hand and the weight of the world in their other. And it's almost a catch-22 for a lot of them. And until we start to get more individuals who can understand that, I think it's going to continue to be a challenge in higher ed specifically.
Thanks.
So my job is to look at all of these things and try to think about what they are doing in the world today. And so for me, what I'm seeing, particularly in early childhood, especially with suspensions and expulsions, is sort of policy out of the state level to prohibit it on the younger kids. So that's been a trend since President Obama sort of was exiting out of office. My job now, one of his senior policy advisors is who I work directly for. And even to get, Head Start is federal. It's a federal program. And so at the federal program, you could do these kind of things. And so Head Start put a prohibition on suspensions and expulsions. So you can't suspend a kid anymore or expel a kid anymore if they're in a Head Start program. So what ultimately started to happen from there is that states started to pass state level legislation to start to prohibit or restrict preschool. Suspensions usually between preschool and third grade is sort of where most states are now. The thing about it is that it's not getting down to the bottom. So schools and teachers and everyone are still suspending and expelling kids in these ages. But I think that it's really important that we focus on it at the younger age, and we are doing so through policy levers and things like that. But the preschool suspension and expulsion rate is higher than the school age suspension and expulsion rate now. So a preschooler is about 3 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than a high schooler is. Currently is the data. And then also in addition to that, girls are now being suspended more harshly and more often than boys are being suspended right now, particularly in the preschool range. And so it's really, really difficult to communicate something like that to parents so that they could be aware. Because if your kid is in daycare and people see these places as daycare and they say, hey, so-and-so's having a hard day today, come and pick him up, right? That's a suspension. Okay, your kid just got suspended that day, right? Parents need to know their kids are being suspended. Or if you take your kid to a place and they're like, oh, we're just having a hard time here, it probably would be best if you could find another center for your child that could better meet their needs. That's an expulsion. Okay, so some of these things are just not viewed the same way in early childhood, and it is traumatic on the children and it's a traumatic on the families. And we think about suspensions and expulsions when we think about school age kids, but we're sending 3-year-olds home and we're sending 4-year-olds home and they're being suspended and expelled. And then there's punitive actions on these children. When we think about discipline, you get in trouble at school, you're getting in trouble at home. Okay. And oftentimes when you're in trouble at school, you didn't do something that you would have gotten in trouble at home for. So these kids are being traumatized at school. Then they get home because their parent had to take off of work, or this was the last day they could take off, so they lost their job. So you know you're about to get a butt whipping. And the truth of the matter is for me, these young children they have the spirit of the ancestors in them, and they're resisting. And there is no way that these schools are going to continue to suppress and oppress our Black and brown children anymore, because it's about 100 generations of ancestors in them popping out every single day. Disruption and defiance and disrespect. That's called, I'm not taking white supremacy anymore. And youth don't know how to appropriately address the oppression. So they act out in behaviors that are seen to be disrespectful behaviors. But the truth is, it's like, you caging me in. And children know and feel it more than we do as adults, because we get indoctrinated the longer we go. So the reason why these behaviors are more severe and younger, because you ain't been indoctrinated enough to accept what's being put on you. And so I know I've been long-winded, but I really just want to sort of think these things through when they happen. And for us that don't know when we're in these spaces, to look at somebody and be like, wait a minute, that was an expulsion, or that was a suspension. Do you know that can't happen? You know, and things like that. And then understanding as parents to not to punish your child if the school has punished them for something, despite what inconvenience it may have caused in your day, or if it may have caused your job, because these kids are being sent home for just resisting being oppressed, just resisting being Black in America's public schools. So
that was helpful. I've never considered what you just said, basically. I mean, with preschoolers being sent home or being suggested to attend in a different preschool, looking at that as suspensions or expulsions, by definition, what it is. So thank you for really highlighting that and clarifying that is.
Yeah, and then not to bring it back up, but 160,000 kids are corporally punished in the United States every year. 160,000. And this starts at preschool, because corporal punishment is legal in 19 states. And so you have kids that are being punished corporally in schools too, and then they go home and get beat again. It's just so traumatizing on children, and it all starts with the discipline at school and how caregivers are receiving it at home. And so we don't know what's happening to these children in the states where it's legal, are southern states. So Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, I can name them all, but Kansas, Kentucky, that's where it's legal.
Wow. That is, so when you sent me the report that you released, and I hope that we'll have you mention that at some point. But I was shocked to see that corporal punishment is, one, legal, let alone in 19 states. That is very concerning. Not just from because I look at, that generation, like that was part of just growing up, really. If you got a whooping at school, or if you got a whooping at church, like, you were getting when you got home. But also when I think of just really the history of the United States, and especially if those brown children in those southern schools, it makes me even
Mississippi is 35% of the school population is Black. Yeah. It's 54% in another one of those states that it's legal in. So these are states that have high populations, disproportionately higher. The national percentage is 13% for Black people, and in Mississippi and some of those southern states, you're talking 30% of the school, 33% of the school. And the thing about it is, because it's historical, do you know that Black parents in the southern states support corporal punishment? So that's why it's still on the books. They support it. But if it's historical, we got whipping, so yeah, you can whip my kid. But these people that are whipping your kid, they have immunity against child abuse, by the way. That's written in the corporal punishment law. You will have immunity against child abuse. So you can abuse these child, break their bones, do whatever you want, and you have immunity.
She's right. Like, all it does is like reinforces this criminalization of Black and brown culture, man. Like it starts it out early. That means that's how they're going to receive punishment, because of the color of their skin. Like it starts early with that, and that mindset goes through. So they're just going to expect that kind of punishment, because that's the way that the system is created for it, man. And that's shady, man. That's
wow. Thank you all for that insight. That was definitely beneficial and unfortunately concerning. But the reality of the situation, and I don't think you can fix problems until you really understand the gravity of them.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. In the state of Ohio, it is illegal to corporally punish children. There are over 90 families that have been corporally punished this past set of data. So if you want to start a Supreme Court case in your state, it's illegal to corporally punish in the state of Ohio since 2000 and I think 6 or 7 or something like that. And they're still doing it. So if it's something that's really passionate about you, Ohio is one of the only states where it's not legal and they're still doing it. It's illegal. It's a Supreme Court case. Like it's a state case. Like it's a civil rights suit, right? But who knows this information? But yes, Ohio is one of the only states where it's illegal and still happening. So you guys can take that on.
What are some of the other statistics that you all would like our viewers to know about?
I was about to say I can give a whole rack of those, but I'll just be real quick as I gave some. 1 in 5 Black preschoolers are put in a self-contained setting if they have a disability. Over half of Black kids with a disability are in a separate setting. That's 54% of them. Only 2% of Black kids are referred for gifted and talented programs. Only 7% of all teachers are teachers of color. I mean, there are so many when it comes to education that, I could sort of kind of go over, but I'll just toss those ones out.
I want to come back to something that Gaddy said earlier, is that, like, when I was in my senior year at BG, for my undergrad, I was the only Hispanic person and the only non-traditional student inside of my cohort. And like, there were, two of my friends were Black, and we all sat at the same table. Just all three of us knowing we're the first of our kind at this table, man. With like, here we go. We got to make sure we see this through, because there's nobody else that looks like us inside this classroom, and we're going out to other schools, especially in Northwest Ohio, that are going to most likely be predominantly white. So like, it's just, it's scary to look at the percentage of how many Hispanic and Black students like do not go all the way through for college, man, that go home, that drop out, that are not ready for it. That I found in my experience that there was kind of a weird reverse correlation in which every time something multicultural came up, we were the ones put on spotlight, for some reason. Like all of a sudden I became the expert on all things that were between white and Black. It's like, wait, hold on, man. Like I know about Hispanic culture. Like I can't talk about Puerto Ricans in any way. Like that's not my thing, man. So there's a reverse correlation to where all of a sudden things are expected of us to do more. Even now, like I am trying to be part of the I think it's the minority program for OEA that one of our reps tries to do on our site, because I am the only male I'm the only male minority teacher at my school. So it's just, there's just a lot of pressure to keep things going, because the pressure's already on by the time you step into the college classroom. So those are some tough things to live with. The statistics for graduating minorities is just, it's getting better, but like somebody said earlier, man, like it's the system still needs to change. Like higher education needs to do some changes with the way in which it deals with minorities who are trying their best.
And it goes back to the statistics with the teachers as well as with the college students. Last year, and we would have done it this year, we crisscrossed the state recruiting teachers at job fairs, students that are going to graduate. And last year, I may have seen and I've went to about 4 universities, 5 students of color. And the last school I was at, I drove home and I just was so disheartened by that, because what it just reminded me of is that we get there, but we don't make it to the end. It's something that's in between. It's the support system. Are they getting the support they need so that they can finish in that time frame, whether it's 4 years, it's 5, or even 6. But where are they? And I just, again, then now we don't have those students to be teachers. Those student teachers cannot become teachers. Now our students don't have teachers that look like them in front of them. So it just creates this vicious cycle. It goes back to the statistics that was mentioned about the teachers. So we really have to just make sure that we have these measures in place to ensure that Black and brown students go to college, attend college, have the support they need, and graduate, because it's essential for children to keep themselves in different careers. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher, just period, because they get this mindset that I'm not good enough and it's for somebody that is not of color. My students have said it to me. We were traveling to a museum. We were on a school bus. The museum in the Cleveland area is University Circle. So it's surrounded by a university. And they said, this is a school for white students, for white people. I jumped up. I mean, I almost hit the roof of the bus to help them to understand, no, it is not. Let's look over here. We saw different people of color, but that was their perception. So it's a constant battle to help my students to understand you're not defined by your zip code, regardless of what you do.
I'll kind of jump in there, kind of hit some of the things that Karen and Michael both said. One of the things that you see, and this is one thing that is a trend, we're recruiting more and more students of color. We're recruiting the heck out of them. But the problem is to support them or sustain them. That's guaranteed. If you look at higher education, the first thing to be cut when you have budget cuts are programs for students of color, because higher education in its history was never designed as a system, right, for us, right? So the first thing you cut are programs that deal with students of color, because you can save money there. But you recruit, but you're just bringing them in and sending them back out, right? So it's a factory line. We recruit them, we bring them. Oh, if I get them for a year, as long as I keep them to the 15th day, I get my state money, right? I get my federal money. But we don't care about what happens to them when they leave after 6 weeks and they have a bill of $1,000 or $2,000. And then they go back home and they can't pay that bill, and they've got student loans on top of that. So now I don't have a job, I don't have income, I know what I'm going to do career-wise, and I've defaulted on my student loans. So I want to go back to school in 10 years. I can't go because I've defaulted on my student loan. You know, at the community college level, we're seeing more and more, especially students of color who have been to school. Like maybe I went to school 5 years ago, life happened, I may have had a child, I may have, done some other things, got a job. And so I want to go back to school, but I've exhausted my resources and I don't have the finances to be able to pay for it now. Or they get into school and the external resources they are external pressures of a child, of a family, of all of those different things become too heavy. I can go for days on students who have been in school, have been doing extremely well. Mom got sick, grandma got sick, something happened, car broke down, kids got, school issues. And so we think, I'll just drop the classes. Well, the processes that are in place, if you drop at a certain time, you'll lose all your federal aid and you'll owe money. So now I owe money, I've lost all my aid, and I've put myself further and further back. One of the things I love about TRIO is we work with students from all different backgrounds. And while programs like Educational Talent Search and Upward Bound are early access, college access programs, you have student support services at 2-year and 4-year institutions. And if it's done right, it should be a pass on, right? If you're in an Educational Talent Search program, I'm going to hook you up with an SSS program. So when you get to a college, you know who to go to, where to go. You got the support that you need to keep you moving. Even from SSS to McNair, which is for graduate students in terminal degrees, it should be a pass on, right? sometimes we don't know about the programs, especially programs like Educational Talent Search or Upward Bound. Sometimes are seen, only seen in certain areas, and people don't know about them, or we don't want to participate in them because we fear that we're going to get labeled for being a part of those programs. And even when you think of institutions 2-year and 4-year, looking at multicultural centers, kind of going back to what Michael said, multicultural centers tend to get the list or the label that that's only for Black students, it's only for brown students, when culture encompasses a lot of different things. And students don't realize that, especially those who come from majority backgrounds, they don't realize that or don't want to be a part of it. And so one of the things that we teach at SSS here at Owens, when a student is looking to transfer, you need to look at all the support that you need, and you need to make sure you find a school that's got the support in place that will help you be successful. Now, there's going to be some areas where you might have to find some things. There's going to be some areas where you might have to poke, but you need to go someplace that's got the most support that can help you when you're in trouble, or people who not only look like you, because that's, like I say, SSS is not, or TRIO is not just for students of color, but people who care about your well-being. People who want to not only see you graduate for their numbers, we get funded based on how many graduates we have and so on, but who want to see you graduate because they care about you at the end of the day.
Man, that was very, very deep. I want to dig a little bit deeper, and this is always this answer is multifaceted for sure. But how did we get here? So each of you have talked about different experiences, different statistics, different provided different stories and different insight. But how did we get to this place?
I'll jump in on that one. It started when Brown versus Board of Education was passed in 1954. That's how we got here. Education was a white system in America, and Black children were introduced into a white system, and Black teachers, Black administrators, Black philosophy, Black curricula, Black principles, African traditions, all of that was left out. And that can apply to every other race and ethnicity in the United States, right? And when Brown versus Board, as it was to desegregate. It said nothing about what needed to come with those kids when they came in. And so now today, what we see as a product of that, we see a product of Black and brown children in white spaces and being indoctrinated. And if you do not conform to whiteness, you will be excluded, you will be pushed out. The funding related to housing and redlining, of course, Black people couldn't live with white people at a point in time. Schools are still based off of these sort of housing geographies where you having kids going to school when they're neighborhood schools. But really, the research is even saying that the neighborhood schools are even more concentrated in the communities in which these schools are in. And so what we know to be the case today is that Brown versus Board was just not very well thought out and thought through. And the ancestors had a different goal in mind. But when you ask the oppressor for something, he's going to pander and give you what it looks like you think you may have gotten. And so we see systemic and institutional racism every day playing out in education. And that's just what I would say.
I agree. I feel like what was supposed to be a way of trying to integrate ended up just being assimilation. And the assimilation was expecting everybody to assimilate to what was already happening. And in a lot of places, especially like I could see it in rural America, right? You just like students are expected to assimilate and look the same, do the same kind of assignments, do the same kind of studies, and just keep on going. When I inherited the classroom that I got into, everything was from this narrative of the Civil War from a soldier's perspective, and it's like there is nothing about what the Civil War is being fought over. It's just completely left out. So right away, the first thing I did was throw out the whole thing. Like, I know the history teacher is going to teach it next door, but my first thing is that we're going to learn this from a civil rights perspective. So got a whole bunch of books that deal with civil rights, and don't start teaching it from, like, for me, like, I'm sorry, but like multicultural doesn't start with slavery. Like there's so much rich history about our people, you know, from different continents and different places and the different cultures that they were. We're not, it's not all homogenous thing. It's a very like multifaceted and multilingual background that gets left out of their narrative because the narrative is still being told from a white perspective. And it's sad that these kids don't get that, and mostly until college, if they get that far. So it's like Dr. Catherine said, it's because someone was already writing the narrative, and they just expected everybody to follow that narrative. So now's the time to start rewriting that narrative to be more reflective of the multicultural, you know, hoi polloi that is us, man.
I'll say, just from at the collegiate level, I think going back to what Dr. Catherine said about assimilating to what white culture or predominant culture was, college became what you had to do. You had to go get a degree. You had to go to a 4-year. And so colleges and institutions have ballooned. They've become massive industries. They've become massive businesses. And in some form, and I can take the heat for this in a lot of different ways, we stopped caring about education and we started caring about just money. We stopped caring about creating critical thinkers and just wanted to fill the seats. And as we continue to just fill seats, we've lost the personal, we've lost the relational, we've lost the thinking. And so, you know, the documentary Declining by Degrees talks about how you have all of these individuals who have degrees but haven't learned anything. They have a degree in whatever, and it's really the pump and dump system. You know, you pump everything into your head and you dump it out for a test and you move on to the next class. So we pump this system up, and it's grown and grown and grown and grown, to where you have institutions that right now, especially because of the pandemic, I think you're looking at are going to implode. Regional institutions that don't have large endowments are going to suffer. Small community colleges that don't have large endowments or don't have a pipeline are going to suffer, which means Black and brown students are going to suffer, right? Those opportunities aren't going to be there. So as we continue this business of higher education, if we don't pump back in the relational piece, I don't foresee it being there very long. You're going to go back to a segregated system where the higher education is just for those who have money, that upper 10%, right? And then as we get students who are on our campus, programs that are designed to help students break down that gap are being defunded. When you talk about programs, access programs like TRIO or, you know, minority programs, they're the first ones that get cut. TRIO is one of those programs that, because we're funded by the Department of Education, I think we crossed over $1 billion in funding. And when you get $1 billion behind your name, people want to come for it, right? And they want to cut it because what we're doing is working, but they don't want to invest in it. They don't want to invest in what we're doing, right? So as we continue to try to defund these programs, we're looking at those people, those resources, those individuals that want to see our students be successful. They're not going to be there. They're being cut left and right because sometimes they think more about the relational rather than the procedural.
And just to add to that, Brandon, what you were saying about relationships, that goes to, we got here by a lack of empathy. We got here by a lack of access. We got here by a lack of equity. When you have a relationship with people, you are able to then have some empathy for individuals, regardless of their race or ethnicity. When you are cognizant of the disparities, you will make sure that there is access and equity for all. So it just hasn't been right since Reconstruction, if we want to just be honest about it. The Reconstruction didn't construct for us. Re means again. It can't be again if it didn't happen in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with that, we are going to wrap up part one of our conversation on race and education. I thank you all very much for providing insight into this really multi-century old issue, and even peeling back some of the causative reasons why we are where we are today. As the United States, and this is the first year within the United States where children of color have outnumbered white children within schools. But even as we think further, and adults, it's projected by around 2045 or so that people of color will be the majority within the United States. And so we've always really needed to have this conversation. But I think people will hopefully realize the urgency of it. Even though it's always been urgent, it's really urgent on a collective, national level at this point. And so we really need to continue to really investigate these issues and look at strategies that have worked, because there are strategies out there. But we also need to really dig deeper and to find out some of the reasons why these inequities and injustices exist for students of color within education. So I thank you all for providing your time. And I look forward to our viewers joining us for part two of race and education. Thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you.